Good Saturday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for February the 25th. Today, we're reading together in Exodus chapter 13 and 14, which is going to give us the details of the Exodus of Israel out of Egypt and across the Red Sea, and all the many details of things that take place during that time. Chapter 13 is really a continuation of what we see at the end of chapter 12. Again, probably not the best chapter break, just because the subject matter doesn't change. It's still the same stuff in the first 17 verses of chapter 13 concerning the future practice of the Passover. So we'll read that together first, then we'll get into the route of the Exodus that picks up in verse 17, and it goes through and talks about Pharaoh pursuing the Israelites, and then what the Lord does with everyone with concerning the Red Sea, their deliverance, its use as a delivering tool, and its use also as a punishing tool. So we'll look at that together here in Exodus 13 and 14. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope that you've had a great week. Hope that your weekend is going well. Let's read together in God's word today. Exodus 13, in verse number 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses, "Consecrate every firstborn male to me, the firstborn from every womb among the Israelites, both man and domestic animal. It is mine." Then Moses said to the people, "Remember this day when you came out of Egypt, out of the place of slavery, for Yahweh brought you out of here by the strength of his hands. Nothing leavened may be eaten. Today in the month of Abib, you are going out. And when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites," looking forward to the future, "the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, which he swore to your ancestors that he would give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you must carry out this ceremony in this month. For 7 days you must eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there is to be a festival to Yahweh. Unleavened bread is to be eaten for those 7 days. Nothing leavened may be found among you, and no yeast may be found among you in all your territory. On that day, explain to your son, this is because of what Yahweh did for me when I came out of Egypt. Let it serve as a sign for you on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, so that Yahweh's instruction may be in your mouth, for Yahweh brought you out of Egypt with a strong hand. Keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. When Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your ancestors and gives it to you, you are to present to Yahweh every firstborn male of the womb. All firstborn offspring of the livestock you own that are males will be the Lord's, will be Yahweh's. You must redeem every firstborn of a donkey with a flock animal. But if you do not redeem it, break its neck. However, you must redeem your firstborn among your sons. In the future, when your son asks you, 'What does this mean?' say to him, 'By the strength of his hands, Yahweh brought us out of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Yahweh killed every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of humans and the firstborn of livestock. This is why I sacrifice to Yahweh all the firstborn of the womb that are males, but I redeem all the firstborn of my sons. So let it be a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead, for Yahweh brought us out of Egypt by the strength of his hands." When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them along the road to the land of the Philistines, even though it was nearby, and I'm inserting this a bit shorter and more direct. For God said, the people will change their minds and return to Egypt if they face war. So he led the people around toward the Red Sea along the road of the wilderness, and the Israelites left the land of Egypt in battle formation. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the Israelites swear a solemn oath, saying, "God will certainly come to your aid. Then you must take my bones with you from this place." They set out from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Yahweh went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to lead them on their way during the day, and in a pillar of fire to give them light at night, so that they could travel day or night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never left its place in front of the people. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi Hatheroth, between Migdol and the sea. You must camp in front of Baal Zephon, facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say to the Israelites, they are wandering around around the land of confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in. I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. Then I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh. So the Israelites did this. Sorry, highlighting these as I go through here, missed some of these somehow. Verse number 5 of Exodus chapter 14, Exodus 14, verse number 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about the people and said, what have we done? We have released Israel from serving us. So he got his chariot ready and took his troops with him. He took 600 of the best chariots and all the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in each one. Yahweh hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out defiantly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen and his army, chased after them and caught up with them as they camped by the sea beside Pi Hahiroth in front of Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians coming after them. The Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see Yahweh's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord Yahweh will fight for you, and you must be quiet. Yahweh said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to break camp. As for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. As for me, I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh, all his army, and his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God who was going in front of the Israelite forces moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them. It came between the Egyptian and Israelite forces. There was a cloud and darkness. It lit up the night, and neither group came near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. The Egyptians set out in pursuit, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen, and went into the sea after them. During the morning watch, Yahweh looked down at the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. He caused his chariot wheels to swerve and made them drive with difficulty. Let's get away from Israel, the Egyptians said, because Yahweh is fighting for them against Egypt. Then Yahweh said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal depth. While the Egyptians were trying to escape from it, Yahweh threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. The Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. That day, Yahweh saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power that Yahweh used against the Egyptians, the people feared Yahweh and believed in him and in his servant Moses. And that is Exodus chapters 13 and 14. Again, this chapter continues in the Passover instructions. Again, we're looking forward. He tells them to once again remember that today is the month of Abib, which would be by our calendar sometime in March and April, and that this is going to be your first month, and this is whenever you're going to you're going to commemorate this event whenever you go, and it gives that timestamp there. Whenever the Yahweh brings you into the land He's going to give you, these are the instructions that you need to keep in mind. So as we read verses 4 through 17, keep in mind that is something that they're looking forward to in the future. These are instructions for future generations. Now, one of the things that's mentioned is, two things I'll mention. Number one, it said twice that these instructions need to serve as a sign for you on your hand and as a reminder for you on your forehead, that these instructions and what they represent need to be something that you really embrace, and they need to be something that you are thankful for. They need to be something that you practice properly. And one of the things that need to be practiced properly was the giving of the firstborn of everything, the firstborn male of the womb, of human womb, or of the livestock. Those should be given to the Lord. Now, of course, we're not going to sacrifice human beings, and that's fine because the Lord has already seen the blood given for them through the Passover. I believe that's what's going on here, is that they are redeemed through the Passover lamb, whereas these other firstborn males of livestock are to literally be sacrificed, except for donkeys, because they're going to be known as ceremoniously unclean. They could be substituted by a lamb of some sort, either a sheep or a goat. But this is something that needs to be done. And again, it's for the purpose of remembering. Verse 14, in the future, when your son asks you, what does this mean? What does it mean to partake of this unleavened bread for this time and to consecrate the firstborn and give that to the Lord? Well, it's to remind them, by the strength of his hand, Yahweh brought us out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. And he did this in the face of Pharaoh, who stubbornly stood up against him. He showed his power, and he showed that no one can stand against him. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord all the firstborn of the womb and that are males, but I redeem all the firstborn of my sons. So let it be again as a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead. For here's the main point. For Yahweh brought us out of Egypt by the strength of his hand. Everything about this is to focus back on Yahweh and why it is, as a people, they were to be committed to him in every single way, in every single sense. They were a people because Yahweh had redeemed them. They were his people. He was their God. They were in covenant with one another. And these ceremonies and these rites that were carried out, they symbolized that. And they reminded them of everything that Yahweh had done. Now, as far as the actual Exodus goes, it seems as if there was a route that could have been taken that would have been maybe a shortcut, more direct to Canaan. But instead, the text says that they did not go, that Yahweh did not take them through or on the road that goes by the Philistines. And it says somewhat, and part of it is they'll face war. And I don't want them to do that. And okay, that's fine. But even more so, I think he's still got plans for Pharaoh. He's still got plans for the Egyptians, that he is still yet to show his ultimate power over them by completely vanquishing Pharaoh, who stood against him. And he's going to do that by causing the Israelites to go a weird route, and then to kind of go in circles and kind of get themselves between a rock and a hard place. And that's going to provide Pharaoh the opportunity to attack, in a sense. Now, it's important to mention at the end of 13 the fact that Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear a solemn oath, saying, God will certainly come to your aid. Then you must take my bones with you from this place. That's going back to Genesis 50 and verses 24 through 25. Joseph had great faith and great confidence that Yahweh would bring his people out of Egypt back to the promised land, and there was a place where his bones need to be buried. It need to be buried with the rest of the patriarchs, and that's what he believed would happen in the future, that God would take his people there. So it was his assertion and something that he demanded, that his bones be taken with them. Moses made sure that happened, and as they're going, we have the text tells us in chapter 13 that the sign of Yahweh's presence with them would have been a pillar of cloud by the day and the pillar of fire by the night. So they could travel day or night, constantly being led by Yahweh. So again, verse 14 begins with Yahweh giving the instructions of Moses to stay in this particular place. Basically, I'm going to lure Pharaoh out. Pharaoh's heart is still hard. He is still rebellious against me. If he sees, number one, that we're not coming back, And number two, that we're in a place that he thinks he can take advantage of us, he will pursue. And my true power, my ultimate power, will be seen in the fact that I will wipe him out for good. And that's exactly what happens. Pharaoh sees in verse number 5, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled. Well, they had fled. He had told them to get out. But it seems to be that he's still working under the assumption that they're just going to go on a 3-day journey to sacrifice and then come back. But it's been longer than 3 days. Maybe it's been about a week now, because there would have been 3 days to go do the thing, and the 3 weeks, or no, the 3 days to come back, and they're still not back. And Pharaoh, in his mind, thinks, "Oh, we've made a mistake. We shouldn't have let them go. They're not coming back to us. This is not just a 3-day journey to go out and sacrifice." So because of his hardness of heart, because of his pride and his arrogance, he pursues them with all the best. Egypt was known for the strength of their chariots. It was an incredible weapon for them, gave them a great advantage over other armies, and they're going to pursue Israel at this time. Now, we need to see the progression of Israel beginning in verse number 8 and going down through verse number 12. In verse 8, they're bold. The text says that they went out defiantly. They went out courageously and with great confidence. But then they see the Egyptians, they see the chariots that are coming after them, and they begin to be fearful. They're terrified, and they cry out to Yahweh, "Why did you bring us," or to Moses actually first, "Why did you bring us out of here? You should have let us die in Egypt. We'd be better off being slaves. We'd be better off than dying here in the wilderness." They second guess everything that's taken on, or that's taken place. And then they just fall into absolute despair. There's a real lack of faith that we see from the Israelites in verses 11 and 12. And this only foreshadows the lack of faith that they're going to show on a number of occasions moving forward, as they show a pattern of complaining and grumbling against Yahweh. Once we see that later on, remember that here, but even remember that going back further to what we saw in the opening chapters, where whenever Moses and Aaron originally come to Pharaoh, that it displeases Pharaoh and he makes their life harder, and they complain then, "Just leave us alone. Why are you making life harder on us?" It's just a continued pattern of behavior from these people. Moses, for his part, tells them to not be afraid, to stand firm, to see Yahweh's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. And what's very interesting is, remember, Pharaoh said, "I will not see you again, and if I do, I'm going to kill you." Well, that didn't happen. But now here's Moses saying that the Egyptians you see today, you won't see ever again. He's going to keep his word, because Yahweh is on his side, as opposed to Pharaoh, who was just posing and posturing himself as if he was somewhat great and powerful. Verse 14, probably a bit more, maybe a little bit stronger language, maybe a lot stronger language than what our English translations say. The Lord, Yahweh, will fight for you, and you must be quiet. More like, you must shut up. Literally speaking, you must shut up. Be silent. Stop complaining. Yahweh has this. In verse 15, to finish out this text, to see the escape through the Red Sea, to see what Yahweh does here. The Lord says in verse 15, he says to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me?" Seems strange, since Moses just got on to the people, but as the story progresses, you see Moses and the people being combined. He is one of the people. He is their representative. So as they complain, it is if Moses is complaining in some senses. And the same way with Moses and Yahweh. Moses has said that he is God to Aaron and to the people. He is their representation. So Moses is really playing this mediating type of role between God and the people. He tells them that you need to break camp, and then you need to take your staff. And notice that this is all Moses, not Aaron anymore. Aaron's kind of somewhat moved out of the picture. Moses is definitely the focal point at this point, and he's going to continue to be so. Lift up your staff, raise your hand over the sea, but it's not really your hand that has the power. It's Yahweh's hand that has the power. How many times have we seen that throughout this text? Especially going back to verse 13. How many times it's said that God, Yahweh, brought you out with a strong hand? I see it once, one time, 2 times, let's see, 3 times, 4 times. I think four times in chapter 13 alone, in that first 17 verses, we see that it's the strength of Yahweh's hand that brought them out of Egypt. And that's going to continue to be the same, even though Moses is the one that's being used to do this. It is Yahweh who is really the power behind all this. So stretch out your hand. The sea is going to part, and there's going to be dry ground. It's going to be a reversal of the creation week once again. That at that point, the waters, the text says in Genesis 1:9, came together to produce dry ground. Well, here the water is going to part to produce dry ground. In Genesis 1, it leads to life, and it's going to lead to life for the Israelites here. But for the Egyptians, it's going to lead to death. And why? Well, this is once again payback, the ultimate payback for Pharaoh using water to bring death upon the Israelites. So now Yahweh is going to use water to bring death upon Pharaoh and his Egyptian army. The text tells us that the angel of the Lord is the one who stood between the multitude of the Egyptians and the multitude of the Israelites, protecting them. And then in the morning, this is whenever this miraculous deed took place. Moses does stretch out his hand, and it says that a powerful east wind, the same east wind that brought in the locust, now parts the sea so the Israelites could walk through on dry ground with the waters like a wall to them on their right and to their left. But here comes the Egyptians. The Egyptians are pursuing. Pharaoh's horses, his chariots and horsemen, they go into the sea after them. And whenever the Lord sees this, he tells, or what he does initially is he throws the forces into confusion. Says that he caused the chariot wheels to swerve, or he bound the chariot wheels is the way other translations render this. Also says that they fell off. So there's something that caused the chariots not to function as they should have. These chariots, again, that the Egyptians were famous for, end up being part of their downfall. They could not drive them like they wanted to, and the Egyptians began to cry out, "We need to get away," because here is Yahweh fighting for them against Egypt. Well, duh. That's what he's been doing this entire time. Why did you think that would stop? Why did you think now Yahweh would not fight for his people? Do you really think Yahweh is just going to bring his people out of Egypt and then let you come back and catch them again? No, not at all. So Yahweh then says to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal depth while the Egyptians were trying to escape from it. The Lord threw them into the sea. Yahweh threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. Not even one. And that day, Yahweh saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. They saw the enemy defeated. This was not something that they just heard about, that God had done somewhere else, that he killed them somewhere else. No, they tangibly saw the bodies. They saw the power of Yahweh at work. And when they saw this, they feared Yahweh and believed in him, and also his servant Moses. They believed in God's prophet. They believed in his designated leader. And oh, that they would have continued living in this way. Because unfortunately, as we're going to see as we continue throughout the story, they're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to continue to revert back to the unfortunate way that they dealt with things in this chapter. They're going to go from being faithful from being bold to being people who doubt and fear. And because they fear, they begin to doubt. And because they then begin to doubt, they second guess and they fall into despair. And they end up being a people who just are not faithful to God as they ought to be. And how sad that is. How sad that they would be this type of people who would forget so quickly what Yahweh had done for them. So the lesson I take away from this text, and what we're going to see on a number of occasions as we go throughout the story of the Exodus and Deuteronomy and such, is we cannot forget. We cannot forget what Yahweh has done for us. We cannot forget about his goodness. We cannot forget about his provisions. We cannot forget about what he has done for us and what he has allowed us to be. We must remain faithful, not fear, not doubt, not despair, but remain faithful to Yahweh. That's where they end in this text. And again, I wish they would stay there, but we'll see exactly more that comes with the story of Israel. Tomorrow we're going to read together chapter 15, which is a song of Moses, as it is commonly referred to. We'll look at that together, and then we're going to see the first instance where there was an issue concerning water and how God once again provides for the needs of his people. I appreciate you tuning in today for this reading. Have a great rest of your Saturday, everyone. And as I just mentioned, we'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading together from Genesis chapter 15. Take care, and God bless.